Well, greetings, everyone. Greetings, everyone. This is Joyce Davis. I am PennLive's outreach and opinion editor, and I usually come to you with editorial board meetings and all of that good stuff. But today, we're having to kind of revamp things. We had our 2025 Peace and Justice in PA Forum that was well underway at Penn State Harrisburg in the Kilcarney Theater. But a mishap occurred. There was a power outage that apparently affected the entire campus. And so we have regrouped because we are what? Resilient, if anything. But we've regrouped to the studios of Penn Live. And so we're in the offices of Penn Live and the Patriot News. And we're going to resume our actual formal program here. We are featuring two dynamic speakers. One who was able to get his speech done, at least the first part, Chad Dion Lassiter, but we're going to ask him to redo that here in the comfort of our studio so that those who are watching on Facebook and on YouTube will have the benefit of hearing the full force of his words, because this is the fifth time that we have come together to explore issues of peace and justice in Pennsylvania. And the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission has been key to that effort over these 5 years. But we also saw that the issue for our communities, and especially for Pennsylvania, was also going to be immigration. And so we were able to actually invite someone who has looked closely at this issue, Sarah Towle, the author of Crossing the Line, Finding America in the Borderlands. So that's why we're here. We have these two speakers here. For now, I'm going to tell you I'm not going to give you the full scope of who Chad Dion Lassiter is because we'll be here for a while. Okay, but suffice it to say, he is executive director of the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission. For the 7 years he's been in that position, he's done incredible things. He has addressed civil tensions, conflict, and incidents in communities across the Commonwealth. He has created programs to educate people about anti-racism. He's done this outreach program called No Hate in Our State Town Hall to address the surge of white nationalism. And he has developed programs such as the Global Social Justice Initiative that's taken him all around the world. I could go on, and I did go on for a while, but I'll tell you, you just need to know that this is really someone who is absolutely dedicated to the issues of social justice, of peace in our Commonwealth and around the world. So with that, I'm going to let Chad offer you some opening remarks.
Thank you so much, Joyce. And the word for today is certainly resilient. We are certainly resilient because we had a robust audience. We had individuals from the Penn State University Harrisburg campus, folk from the larger community. We had individuals from the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission, all here today, waiting on the edge of their metaphoric seats for our presenter, our keynote person who's here in America today. And so we're very excited. So we're just resilient. We engage in forms of adaptability. But I just want to read again what I read in the moment, and then I want to get out of the way. I want to get out of the way so that we can turn it over to a person that is going to certainly inspire us here in the Commonwealth, as well as empower us for greater themes of social justice, peace, and justice. As daunting as this moment is, the struggle for justice is not new. This time is just our moment. How will we meet it? I am inspired by the people in the book of Nehemiah. Facing their own dangerous and chaotic moment, they fought with one hand, and they built with the other. They fought and they built simultaneously. They did not look away, waiting for the difficult moment to pass. They did not ask for permission or for safety to start fighting and ultimately building. They did not prioritize comfort before they cast their vision against impossible odds. They demonstrated that chaos has always been the fertile soil of transformation, of building something brand new. Or as Martin Luther King said in his book, where do we go from here? Chaos or community? Our great opportunity now is to be the modern day builders of our Nehemiah wall, simultaneously fighting and building. And so today, I'm humbled I'm honored, not as the executive director of the PHRC, but as a servant leader to sit in between two amazing human beings who are more than just social justice bookends. They are individuals who inspire me in this moment that we're in. And so, once again, uh, we're here. We're excited that you're here and that we're going to be having the discussion after we hear this keynote from this brilliant social change agent.
Thank you, but I'm happy to be a social justice bookend. I like
Me
in the
too.
service of social justice. That's fine. Listen, one of the things that we are not able to do uh, right now is to honor. We had one individual and two organizations that we were honoring with the Peace and Justice and PA Awards. Those honors will be presented. They will be presented to the Pennsylvania Immigration Coalition, to the Church World Service, and to an incredible individual, Dr. Phuong Truong, who is the executive director of the International Service Center, who spent decades trying to help immigrants and refugees in our region. They will be getting their awards tomorrow at 6 p.m. at Grace United Methodist Church in Harrisburg. So stay tuned for that, and if you can come by, please do so. But now let's come to the point, the exciting point that we're here for, to hear from Sarah Towle. She is an educator, a researcher, an author, a human rights defender, a nature lover, and a chorale soprano. It's incredible the things that she's doing. But she is a world traveler who flew in from London. She has taught English language literacy, cross cultural communication, conflict resolution skills, and the writing craft for 3 decades on 4 continents, including under the trees in refugee camps. Tal is author of the award-winning book that's there, Crossing the Line, Finding America in the Borderlands. And that's why we have asked her to speak here for us today for the fifth Peace and Justice in PA Forum and Awards. In addition to the many awards this book has received, it has also received accolades from such incredible people like Ken Burns, who called it, quote, an absolute must read for anyone who wants to understand the complexities of the immigration debate beyond political rhetoric. And Kirkus Reviews called it, quote, a powerful expose of the human costs of America's immigration policies. And I will say that the reviewer Austin Kocher described her work this way. Crossing the Line is a well-researched yet accessible expose of border policies that harm migrants and undermine the promise of America. So the reviewer concludes, and went on to say some other wonderful things, but he concludes every concerned citizen should read this book. So it should be noted for those here that Toll actually wrote the first edition of this book in 2024. This was before President Donald Trump returned to the White House. So it is extraordinarily interesting for us today to hear her thoughts, as many communities are reeling from the administration's campaign of mass deportations, funding cutoffs to agencies helping immigrants and refugees, and banning citizens of many African countries from even coming into the United States. So, with that, please join me in welcoming author Sarah Towle.
Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you.
Absolutely, Sarah.
Thank you so much, Joyce and Chad. Thank you for the wonderful introduction. But even more than that, I'm just so honored to have been invited and to be with you all on this auspicious and resilient day. To talk about what might be the most urgent and pressing challenge of our age, immigration. I say that because it is at the intersection of all other issues that we face in our country, in our democracy, and it has been the weapon harnessed by the Trump regime to drive US democracy into crisis. My plan today is to start by telling you a little bit about me, who I am and how it is I came to write this book, what I learned through the process. And then I'd like to end with a call to action, one that I believe aligns with the good trouble of those that we actually gathered to celebrate today. So as Joyce told you, I am an economic migrant, but I get to call myself an expat because of my white skin and my blue passport. I have made a career of offering welcome to newcomers and dignity to asylum seekers and refugees on 4 continents, across the age span in myriad classroom contexts, including, as Joyce said, under the trees in refugee settings, in particular in El Salvador during the US-funded Central American Dirty Wars. That said, I never really understood the depth of the brokenness of our immigration system until June 2018, when the first Trump regime sparked the cries of 6-year-old Alison Jimena Valencia Madrid. These were cries heard round the world. So I'm sure you remember them too. A small child made to memorize a phone number in a moment of panic when her mother realized they were about to be pulled apart. A 6-year-old made to grow up all too fast, begging a Border Patrol official to please call her auntie, reciting the phone number over and over and over again through veils of tears while other children sobbed in the background, and the agent laughed off their heartbreak, calling it an orchestra without a conductor. That muffled 8-minute recording was taken from the pocket of a whistleblower inside the Ursula Processing Center in McAllen, Texas. I put processing in quotes because whether we call them processing centers or detention centers or use some hideous moniker that perpetuates stereotypes and tropes that suggest criminal pathologies like alligator Alcatraz, these are facilities encased in coils and coils of razor wire, itself a tool designed to shred human flesh. They exist to cage people. They are prisons. Prisons that lock up people who have largely committed no crime. Unless you believe that running for your life and asking for protection in another land is a criminal act. It is not. It is all our legal and human right. Many, if not most, of those incarcerated in these places come to the United States, the self-styled beacon of hope, seeking a safer and more productive life for themselves and their children, which is their legal and human right. Some of them have been among us for years. Many grew up here, built careers here, created families here. They are no less baseball and apple pie than you and me. But few of us knew anything about the conditions inside these facilities before hearing Alison Jimena's cries. And when we did, what did we do? We rose up in collective policy and put on display for the cameras by an administration that wanted to be cruel, that wore US immigration cruelty like a badge of honor. In my research, however, I would come to document 8 ways in which our immigration policies and practices separate families and have done so for decades across administrations on both sides of the political aisle. Today, every time ICE raids a workplace or drags someone out of their car or knocks down the door of a private home or rappels from a helicopter atop a city building and commences to smashing in windows, Families are torn apart. Loved ones are separated. Now, I did not know in June 2018 that family separation was a feature, not a bug, of the US immigration system. I had much to learn. But family separation was the inciting incident that propelled me on a journey across the 2,000-mile US-Mexico line and into the deep, dark underbelly that is the ICE detention to deportation pipeline, resulting in this book. Crossing the Line, Finding America in the Borderlands begins in a refugee encampment just across the Rio Grande from Brownsville, Texas, on the threshold of the world's richest nation. An encampment of 3,000 people representing 70,000 mothers, fathers, sisters, brothers, aunties, uncles, grandparents, and tiny babies. 1/3 of the population was children. No threat to anyone, certainly no threat to US national security. Trapped in some of the most dangerous places on earth by the first Trump administration's migrant protection protocols, which you might remember as the Remain in Mexico program, which didn't protect anyone at all. The book ends on 2 mass deportation flights, dubbed death planes, boxcars in the sky, and flying Abu Ghraibs, that took place during the first of Trump & Co.'s mass deportation campaigns, the one few people knew about, but which is documented in my book, and the likes of which this second Trump regime has turned into a daily fact of life. How? By harnessing Department of Homeland Security enforcement agencies as private paramilitaries in the service of a wannabe strongman, complete with masked men bearing arms rather than judicial warrants. My book is only one of 2 public accounts that I'm aware of to document what actually takes place on an ICE air expulsion flight, because previous administrations didn't want us to know. This one does. And the legal and human rights violations are myriad. They defy faith values. They defy democratic values. They defy moral values. They defy human decency. They cross the line, powered by cruelty for cruelty's sake, and I am here to tell you the cruelty is not okay. Some have called Crossing the Line the primer text to the immigration issue, the best place to start if you really wish to study and dive in to this topic. Still others have called it a handbook for a more humane world, because it holds up to the light the tales and voices of roughly 100 people, including those of individuals trapped under the knee of this cruel, cruel immigration system, but also those of the first responders, like the folks we gathered to honor today, who have been tirelessly waging a grassroots war of welcome for years. Last November 5th, 2024, however, the handbook transformed again, literally overnight, into what more and more people are calling a manual for a movement that recognizes the need for just migration. I had many, many mentors and guides, folks who became my storytelling collaborators on what would become the journey of awakening I recount in my book. Folks who, once compelled to bear witness to the human costs of our immigration system, could never, ever look away again. They're not heroes. They're just ordinary people like you and me, expressing extraordinary acts of kindness every day. Some of them, as I said, would have been in our midst today. They show us every day that there is a better way, that we can welcome newcomers with dignity, and that we'd be a much better nation and people for it. It's these first responders, these warriors of welcome, as I call them, who are providing the answers to the seemingly intractable situation we find ourselves in, not just here in the United States, but worldwide. We need only to look to them to discover who we can be, who we should be, who we must be, and who many of us believe we already are. Yet across this nation, they are being intimidated, vilified, even criminalized for their kindness. And the criminalization of caregivers and newcomers alike has been amped up by degrees under the second Trump regime, as more and more people who've tried to migrate the so-called right way, who are trying to follow the rules, are being labeled the worst of the worst without proof and being kidnapped off our streets, out of their homes, from their work sites, from their places of worship, and trafficked in chains to prison camps, 80% of which are run for profit. When I went to the border to see for myself the inhumanity I then believed had been wrought by Trump and co., I crossed the threshold into a world I did not perceive before June 2018, but whose creation I have come to understand began right around the time of my birth and grew up all around me, all around all of us, hiding in plain sight just outside our privileged view. That world is called the border industrial complex. The offspring of the Cold War era military industrial complex and the sibling of the post 9/11 national security state, the border industrial complex encircles the globe like a second equator, cleaving the wealthy, predominantly white world from the less wealthy, less white one, creating a global apartheid, where borders, which have always been tools of in-group, out-group exclusion and are therefore inherently racist, are growing deeper, taller, angrier, and more violent all the time. When the Berlin Wall fell in 1989, for example, there were 12 such barriers around the world. And those of you who were alive then, as I was, will remember it as a time of hope, right? The Cold War was over. We thought we were moving toward a kinder, more inclusive and diverse era, the promise of the civil rights movement. There are now more than 80 walls like it around the world and counting. So my first learning, once inside the world of the border industrial complex, was that it did not begin with Trump. He and his acolytes had been enabled by presidential administrations before them on both sides of the political aisle to simply crank the cruelty to 11, their first time around. This time they are sending that cruelty off the charts. But here's the rub. The cruelty of the US immigration system is not their shame alone. I encountered 7 deadly specters inside the border industrial complex, which I'd like to recount to you now. The first is, as I mentioned, this bipartisan project dating back decades to extend our borders across oceans and through deserts and deep into other national territories as a way to make end runs around the 1951 Refugee Convention. That document, born of the shame of turning Jewish refugees back to their deaths in Nazi concentration camps, became the international treaty governing global asylum protections. Its prescriptions were written into US law as the 1980 Refugee Act, which means that requesting asylum is never illegal. And asylum seekers can never be illegals. This was negotiated by Jimmy Carter just before he left the White House and should be recognized as the law of the land. But even before the ink dried on the legislation, the Reagan-Bush administration were flouting it. They did this by pushing Haitian asylum seekers back to the harms they fled, or to a concentration camp they had erected to hold them at the US military base on Cuba's Guantanamo Bay. The second deadly specter of the border industrial complex includes a 100-mile policing zone. Did you know that there is a 100-mile policing zone that traces the entire perimeter of our country. It's 100 miles in from the seas, 100 miles in from land borders. It consumes 2/3 of the US population, 9 of our 10 largest cities, and 6 whole states by my count, as well as the District of Columbia. It is the jurisdiction of a 60,000 plus member force and counting that knows no transparency. And since Trump dissolved its civil rights and civil liberties team a few months back, that force now suffers no accountability, which is troubling, considering these were the troops turned on all of us during the Black Lives Matter protests of the summer of 2020. And it is only one of the forces being turned on us again in 2025. I'm speaking of Customs and Border Protection, which includes the Border Patrol, who, owing to a series of dubious 1970s Supreme Court decisions, have the right to police by racial profiling. And they do every day in this 100-mile Constitution compromised policing zone. And the Supreme Court under John Roberts just gave ICE latitude to do the same. For now, it's limited to LA, but that's just one of many slippery slopes in Trump's USA. And though racial profiling is not necessarily felt directly by people who look like me, it is compromising all of our constitutional protections to unlawful searches and seizures under the Fourth Amendment. The third specter is the counterpart of Customs and Border Protection. This entity, this agency, is meant to police the interior of our country. It is a 20,000 member force, soon to be 30,000 member force, and I'm sure you know who I'm talking about, ICE. Now, even 30,000 agents may not sound like enough to police the entire interior of a country as large as the United States, but ICE works in collaboration with local police forces, thanks to agreements dating to 1952 and upheld under the Clinton administration in 1996 that deputize cops to do ICE's work for them. They are called 287G agreements, and they allow ICE and local police entities to state they are going after criminals and felons. But here's the thing. Under the same law that houses these 287G agreements, what's known by its acronym IRA, what may be a misdemeanor crime for me, like shoplifting or speeding or driving with a busted taillight, can be spun into an aggravated felony, criminalizing you and turning you, if you are among the 12 million people currently living among us that has never ever been afforded a path to citizenship, into something called a deportable illegal alien, landing you in mandatory detention until your deportation can be realized. So many of our friends, neighbors, colleagues, and family members have been returned to places they never ever knew because of these laws. And that includes 94,000 veterans of our armed forces and counting, people willing to give their lives for this country, gone because of a misdemeanor crime. ICE, too, knows no transparency or accountability, though agency acts of crime, violence, brutality, and impunity are legion and well documented. The agency has now been harnessed by an administration with authoritarian aspirations like a paramilitary army. And under the legislation the occupant of the White House calls beautiful, what I prefer to call the MAGA murder mandate, ICE and CBP have the ATF, the Marshal Service, and the Bureau of Prisons combined. That's $170 billion That's bigger than most national militaries. Only the US, Russian, and Chinese militaries enjoy a bigger purse. That's money that comes from our tax dollars. The fourth specter, both ICE and CBP operate under the Department of Homeland Security, whose roots can be traced back to the slave patrols of the pre-Civil War era through one man, Jefferson Milton Davis, the son of a Confederate enslaver. He became the first ever US Border Patrol agent in 1924 after cutting his teeth as a Texas Ranger from the age of 17. The Texas Rangers were themselves a product of the Ku Klux Klan, which is what the slave patrols became when the Civil War put an end to the ownership and lifelong enforced imprisonment of our fellow human beings. These are the rotten foundations upon which our Department of Homeland Security apparatus was built. It is quite simply a white supremacist institution that has now been infiltrated by white supremacists. And it enjoys unchecked power, as well as a military-sized unlimited purse. The fifth specter of the border industrial complex includes 200 plus ICE prisons, 80% of which are run for profit by contractors like Geo Group and CoreCivic, paid with our tax dollars to lock up a quota of peace-seeking people on any given day. On 9/11, that quota was more or less 5,000. Under Obama, it expanded to 35,000. Biden boosted that number again to 41,500. Today, right now, there are more than 61,000 people locked away and counting because Tom Homan, Stephen Miller, and Kristi Noem, people we did not elect, are committed to taking that number to 100,000 as soon as possible. And they have a $45 billion budget earmarked expressly to build more facilities, to incarcerate people who have mostly committed no crime other than to overstay a visa or to enter the US without inspection. Some came for work and remained trapped by our walls, both physical and bureaucratic. Some were carried here in a loved one's arms. The vast majority came to the so-called exemplar and freedom of hope, exemplar of freedom and beacon of hope, seeking safety from harm, horror, and hunger, only to be shackled, wrists in cuffs, ankles manacled, both tied into a heavy waist chain, thrown into a jumpsuit, color-coded for alleged crime, red if they perceive that you might be a terrorist, and locked up in prison for profit. It's the very definition of enslavement. Trump and co. are imprisoning criminals, they say, to facilitate their mass deportation effort, they say, but what they're really doing is enriching their cronies, the prison profiteers, CoreCivic, Geo Group, LaSalle Corrections, and others who systematically deny their imprisoned adequate food, access to legal representation, medical care, and contact with their families. Detention is their point. And their prisons are largely black sites, like the Everglades concentration camp. I insist we call it what it is. Like Guantanamo Bay, a place synonymous with torture. Like Sacat, an El Salvadoran torture prison that we paid Nayib Bukele $6 million to enslave, Kilmar, Abrego, Garcia, among others, whose criminal record has yet to be established. And even if it was, we should not be treating people this way. There are international laws and protections. There are human rights conventions. We should not be kidnapping people and renditioning them to a lifetime of imprisonment, whether in domestic or external torture centers, which is what they are. Human rights are being violated in our name and with our money, and the cruelty is not okay. The sixth specter of the border industrial complex includes a for-profit transportation machinery of buses and armored jails on wheels, as well as costly military transports, chartered chartered planes, chartered airlines like Global X and Avelo and Omni Air Internationals and others, as well as the airport fixed-based operators that support their activities, that do the hangering and trafficking and pumping of gas. There are pilot and flight attendant unions also complicit in aiding the ICE air machine. There are restraining device manufacturers such as Safe Restraints, whose full body apparatus called the WRAP forces compliance on the many through the torture of the few. Now, ICE airplanes whisk peace-seeking people away, and ICE agency crimes along with them in daily expulsion missions that return folks in need of safety, always in shackles and chains, back to the very harms and fears and horrors they fled. Or to third countries the regime calls safe, like Sudan, which has been creating its own refugees for years. These places are not safe. These are places that many folks never once set foot in. Places they never knew, where they know no one, where they will struggle to speak the language, where they will not be able to earn a living, where they will be separated from their family and unable to get back, perhaps forever. The cruelty is not okay. And in this world of the border industrial complex, our legal obligations on the part of folks seeking a safe and dignified life per their international legal and human rights play out every day in kangaroo courts, which have so compromised the promise of due process under the law that one immigration judge once likened her job to hearing death penalty cases in traffic court-like settings. I can attest, I've been to a fair few, and they are traffic court-like settings where you are considered guilty until you can prove that you do indeed require protection. When denied, as so many are, if they get to see a judge at all, as so few do, they are deported in chains back to the harms and horrors they fled, or to harms and horrors they've yet to perceive for profit. The cruelty is not okay. Now, this entire Rube Goldberg machine, or many-headed hydra, as I like to call it, the Goliath of the border industrial complex, was built on the foundations of a single theory. It's called prevention through deterrence, but I prefer to call it deterrence through cruelty because the theory posits that if we make migration to the United States as dangerous and difficult and perilous and painful as possible, those who survive it, and many don't, will send word back home. They'll say, do not come. Do not come. But folks continue to come because prevention through deterrence does not work. It has never, ever worked. And we should know this by now because it is 31 years old. Enacted on October 1st, 1994, 9 months after the North American Free Trade Agreement, or NAFTA, opened the borders to the free and unfettered movement of goods and money. That is when our corporations, our manufacturing plants, our extractive industries, our monoculture agricultural concerns were incentivized to go south in search of low wages, no environmental protections, and low to no taxation. It is also when the State Department, and this is documented, realized that that would cause human displacement and drive people northward. So prevention through deterrence began, kicked off by a militarized mission called Operation Gatekeeper, which continued the process of sealing the southern border to people. I say continued because no matter what Fox News tries to tell you that Biden opened the borders, he didn't. The process of closing the borders to people began in the 1880s with the Chinese Exclusion Act, which didn't even try to hide its racism under a clever name. It was concretized in the 1920s with the establishment of the Border Patrol. It was accelerated in the latter decades of the 20th century with border externalization efforts like pushing Haitian asylum seekers to Guantanamo Bay, as well as Operation Gatekeeper. It became supercharged after 9/11 with the so-called war on terror, and it is now policy under Trump and co. But all prevention through deterrence has ever done is exact tremendous misery and harm. Untold numbers of peace-seeking people have died or disappeared because of it. The Sonoran Desert is a graveyard. The Caribbean Sea is a graveyard. Prevention through deterrence is an abject failure, a deadly destructive policy that has and can never work. Why? Because as long as there have been people on this planet, we have moved. It's part of our human story. Unless you hail from indigenous roots, and in some cases even then, todos somos migrantes. Unless your ancestors were kidnapped and brought here in chains across the Middle Passage, todos somos migrantes. Your people likely fled harm, horror, and hunger as mine did. Or they moved toward better, because that's what we do. We move toward better. We move toward opportunity, as I have been allowed to do for the whole of my career. Now, I know it sounds dire,
Sure does.
and it is.
But there's hope.
But in this world of the border industrial complex, I also found hope.
Yeah.
I found hope in the mentors and guides you will read in the pages of my book or listen to if you choose to, and I hope you will. I found hope in people such as those we gathered to honor today. These are the folks, the myriad helpers all across the line and all over the United States, including right here in Pennsylvania, who've been willing to stand up for humanity in the face of what is truly a manufactured crisis, a crisis 100% made in the USA, a crisis that deliberately traps the world's most vulnerable people, borrowing from the UN's terms, in some of the most dangerous places on earth, whether that means in our prisons or on the migratory trail that was created by our walls, where they are preyed upon by organized crime, bad actors who responded to a market opportunity created by our walls, whether physical, technological, bureaucratic, or military. The crisis was made in the USA. Indeed, I conclude in my book that the real crisis we face today is not the number of people striving to join the American experiment or hoping to stay right here where they've put down roots, made careers and families, the place they call home. Rather, the crisis is the hardening of the human heart against their hope for better. Because what we should have been asking all these decades, what we should be asking now is, why are so many people on the run? And interrogating that and taking responsibility for the role we play in that as a nation, for they are the same forces that are now strangling our planet to death. Instead, all our government has chosen to ask all these decades is, how do we stop them? It is time we all accept and understand that folks who've had to pull up stakes and run did not do so because they wanted to. Nobody wants to leave their family, their language, their community, all they've ever known. If they don't have to, it's the rare bird who does, and I'm one of them, so I can say that. No mother wants to put her daughter on the back of La Bestia, the freight train that rumbles through Mexico, with a morning after pill in her pocket, knowing she will be raped. No family wants to set sail in a dinghy across the Caribbean. They do so because the water is safer than the land. No father wants to entrust a coyote with his beloved child, hoping he or she will make it safely across an increasingly walled-off Sonoran desert in 100+ degree heat with a single jug of water. And no person wants to scale a wall of blisteringly hot steel bollards rising to 30 feet, knowing that if they tumble over the other side, they might endure broken bones or traumatic head injury or death. Folks are pulling up stakes and running even into dangers such as these because their homes have been turned into the mouths of sharks, in large part due to our foreign and economic policies dating back decades and centuries, as far back as the Monroe Doctrine, as far back as the settler colonial ideology of manifest destiny. They do so because their hope for better knows no borders, and our cruelty in the face of that hope. Southwest. The militarization of our borderlands did not begin with 9/11. That was just the excuse to crank it up. Nor is the system broken, as pundits and politicians would have us believe. It is working just fine for the demagogues and profiteers who benefit from it, which is why we've seen no human-centered reform to this system in almost 4 decades. We live in a divided nation, in large part due to the way immigration has been weaponized. But even those with the most hardened of hearts can agree that the cruelty is not okay, because it is trouncing all our values as members of a democratic society, as communities of faith, as communities willing to bear witness. It was an infrastructure that was already in place when Trump and co. took over the White House the first time. They tried to unleash it then, but they were largely thwarted by the courts and their own ineptitude. This time, however, they know what they're doing. And sadly, we have been here before. Bull Connor is back. George Wallace is back. Hitler and Mao, Joe McCarthy, they're all back. Evil walks the earth once more, this time in the form of Donald Trump and Stephen Miller, of Thomas Homan and Kristi Noem, of Pete Hegseth, Marco Rubio, Russell Vought, Pam Bondi, and so many others. They are the worst of the worst. And their cruelty is not okay. But we have overcome before, and we will overcome again because we know how. With all of us standing together and strong, building our Nehemiah wall, throwing ourselves into the gears of this machinery of misery like a billion tiny grains of sand to jam them up and keep them from turning until these dark days are behind us, just as we did during the family separation crisis of 2018, with each of us right now all over the nation playing their single small part, emulating the helpers in our midst, the good folks making great trouble who we came together to meet today. We can jam the gears of cruelty as we simultaneously grow a large choir of resistance, singing loud and in glorious harmony, "This is not the nation we wish to be. This is not the nation we believe ourselves to be. We are better than the result of the last election, and we don't want to be associated with the indignity and deliberate cruelty of an immigration system that has become a dagger plunged into the heart of our democracy. These days will end. They always do. And when they do, we will be ready if we act today, right now, like, what is it? Like, who was the guy?
Nehemiah.
Like Nehemiah. I said that. I just said that a minute ago, and then I blanked. If we act today like Nehemiah to build a better nation from the coming ashes. So crossing the line is an expose. It is also a call to action. It is also a celebration of the good work being done by so many on behalf of human rights and civil liberties, on behalf of peace and justice for all. It is a manual for a movement for just migration and an invitation to folks everywhere to join the choir of resistance to help build the Nehemiah wall if you haven't already. As you hear from the 100 or so voices in my book, as you hear the stories of today's honorees, I urge you to remain aware of the one example that makes your heart beat just a little faster and choose to do that. We have so many ways to join the movement, and we won't go into them now, but you are most welcome to join us tomorrow at Grace Church, where we will flesh out the how-to of what we can each do, even right here in Harrisburg. So I'll leave you with this one last point. If each and every one of us chooses to do just one thing, commits to that for an hour a week or 7 days a week, our collective collaboration will provide the bulwark we are going to need to get through these next several years. And when this dark chapter is finally behind us, it will be us taking the lead in recreating the nation we wish to be. One in which diversity, equality, and inclusion are celebrated. One characterized by peace, justice, and human rights for all. A true exemplar of freedom and a beacon of hope for all those the world over striving to live free, including right here in these reunited states of America. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Well, author Sarah Towle, you didn't mince your words. You gave it, and clearly you are the expert. You have taken the time over years to delve into these issues, but I can tell you that most Americans
Don't know.
don't know what you just laid out.
No.
And what is so overwhelming is that there's so much.
Yeah.
It's so complex, it's everywhere. But I'm going to hit you with some tough questions, and I'm going to let Chad do it, because that's what journalists do, right?
Here, hit me, baby.
We hit you with tough questions. So the first question is this. I'm sorry, author Towle, but I like what President Trump is doing.
Mm.
I like the fact that he's tough. He stopped those people coming in at the border. And guess what? If they don't like it here, they should leave. And we'll make them leave. I hate to tell you this, author Towle, but we're being told that a majority of Americans have no problem with what is going on now with immigration. That is what we're being told by the polls. How can that be?
Of course you would hit me with the hardest question first. No, this is it. We have to find a way to talk to those who have been inculcated to believe that most people agree, because most people don't agree. And the polls are showing that. And that is why he's running scared. If you listen only to Fox News, then you'll agree that that's what people think. So once upon a time as an educator, I used to say, listen to all the news outlets and develop some critical thinking, listen to all sides and formulate your own opinion. But now I say, turn off Fox News because it is a propaganda machine and it is lying to us and it is providing, pumping disinformation into the hearts and minds of most Americans. And then I will also say to you, after you've turned that off, stop and think. Really, do you think the cruelty is okay? Do you think it's okay to pound down the doors of a private home and take a child out in her pajamas in zip ties? Really? Do you really think that that is what the so-called leader of the free world should be modeling for the rest of the world? Is that the nation you really want to be a part of? I mean, I understand that you voted for him because he promised lots of things, like bringing the cost of eggs down. Are your eggs cheaper? Is anything cheaper? Do you realize that the costs will only go up as we lose the people who for years we've relied on to make such things as eggs and produce available in our stores? I mean, I understand that you put your promise in him, but I also urge you to look around and see what's happening and tell me, do you really think that men in masks should be patrolling the states of a democracy with arms, and that spraying members of the cloth, of people of the cloth, with pepper bullets and tear gas is an appropriate response?
Thank you, Arthur.
With that question, were
You
you
go
play-
ahead. You
No,
go.
but with that question, were you playing Angel's Advocate?
I was indeed.
Okay, because that ain't okay. I just want to know.
Journalists have to be tough.
No, I like that. One of the things about the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission is that we're nonpartisan, we're neutral. But one of the things that I so love about being the executive director is being able to see members of my senior management team, staff who are in the Pittsburgh regional office, Harrisburg regional office, and Philadelphia regional office talk about their children.
Mhm.
So I want to lean in, not solely with an identity as the executive director of PHRC, but I'm a social worker. And I know that one of the goals when we're talking about the child welfare system and other systems is family preservation, family reunification. Against the backdrop of the border industrial complex, does your book account for any of the success stories where families were reunited?
Mm.
I'm thinking about, trauma. I'm thinking about vicarious traumatization. I'm thinking about, separation anxiety. I'm thinking about so many things, and I'm not trying to, paint a picture of pathology, but so many things that may emerge that we see in the DSM-5,
Mhm.
297 mental disorders, and a lot of that is about ethos.
Yeah.
So does the book capture any of those success stories where families were reunited with their children?
Yeah, chapter 1.
Okay.
Chapter
right
1.
at the beginning.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So students, that's why you need to read, right? Had I read the book prior to this, I would have known that it was in chapter 1.
Yeah, through the story of an attorney called Jody Goodwin, who was on the front lines when the family separation crisis began following zero tolerance in early 2018. She just saw what was happening and she stepped in, and she I'm gonna forget the actual numbers. You might be able to find them as you flip through, but she single-handedly could be held responsible, not held responsible, held in gratitude for herself and the team that she created, reuniting something like 535 families.
Wow.
That's one person. There were more than 5,000 families
Wow.
separated, and there are still 1,000 or so today that remain unreunited because the first Trump administration had no intention of reuniting families, and so did not capture data, did not, make a list of dad has gone to this detention center and child has gone to that one. So it did take folks like Jody Goodwin, the Texas Civil Rights Project, Al Otro Lado. The names could go on and on. The numbers of folks who just stepped up and even without pay worked their buns off to reunite families. And the way they had to do it is that you'll probably appreciate this as a social worker, that once kids are inside the Office of Refugee Resettlement, which is under Department of Health and Human Services, once they're inside that system, everybody protects them. They lean on the need to protect the children. So unless it's a parent asking for them, even lawyers couldn't get access to them and didn't know where they'd been taken.
That's a good
So-
thing then. That's
Well,
great.
yes, unless they've been separated and their parent is looking for them.
Well, yes.
Then it took
Yeah.
getting parents out of ICE prisons first, so that the parent could then get their hopefully located child. And about 1,000 were lost.
Wow.
So, but I agree with you that it is creating terror. It's traumatizing.
Yeah.
And the other thing about this this machinery that they've weaponized, they've harnessed for their ends, is that it's become a domestic terror apparatus, and we're all feeling it now.
Joy certainly has more questions. I just have
We
one
never had-
lasting question, which is and it's twofold. When Dr. King talks about the triple evils of poverty,
Mhm.
militarism, and racism,
Mhm.
and you spoke about the border industrial complex. We know about the military industrial complex, and certainly we know about the prison industrial
Mhm.
complex. How do we create what I term as peace colonies
Mhm.
in the midst of all of this kind of darkness, all of this kind of misinformation?
Mhm.
What does a peace colony look like? And not a peace industrial, because that industrial, but what does a peace colony look like
Right.
if you juxtapose that against the backdrop of the border industrial complex,
Yeah.
the military industrial complex, as well as the prison industrial complex, which is all tied into imperialism, capitalism, and profit?
Yeah, 100%. There are probably a lot of ways to answer
I
that
took
question.
my ginkgo biloba.
Yeah.
I took ginkgo biloba like this morning, so.
All right. All right.
There are probably a lot of ways to answer that question, but the one that springs to mind is that back in the 1980s, when our dirty wars were creating refugees that the then Reagan administration didn't want to admit, the folks he was turning as refugees were not allowed in. And at that time, there were folks all over the borderlands, particularly in Arizona, that said, this will not stand. Our government is crossing the line. They're breaking laws. So in an act of disobedience, they smuggled folks in and they created an underground railroad. And at that time, they proposed to the government that, hey, look, we have all these folks. A system of welcome along the border, then pay these people to develop and concretize the skills that they're already applying. Why don't we have, alongside the Border Patrol that should exist to keep drugs out of the country and guns out of the country and terrorists out of the country, and that's what they've been trained to do. Why don't we let them do their job and give the job of welcoming folks in need of protection, fleeing harm, and hunger, this more humanitarian role? And even in 1980, that was never taken up. But you could see that happening now, where we have welcome centers versus prisons, where people migrate to an interlocutor to whom they can tell their story right away and be taken seriously. And then we can go, hey, you know what? Maybe you don't deserve or aren't eligible for asylum. But we understand that you're fleeing a temporary harm. And in the meantime, what do? Oh, you're a roofer? We could use you on this construction site over here. And then in those pockets where people with skills are being sent to places where skills are needed, we can create, what did you call them? Peace colonies there. Give them affordable housing and provide for the education of their children.
And put them to work,
Put them to work. There's a Pennsylvania scholar at the University of Pennsylvania at Wharton School called Ezekiel Hernandez. And he's written a beautiful book about the truth about immigration. And he shows that, the very firm, very staunch MAGA will say, no, that will pull people, right? But he shows that in societies that do this kind of welcome and enable for people to, live and have a productive life before going back, that incredible ties, national ties are created, family ties are created, economic ties are created that actually enable both countries. So, this pull narrative is a fiction and is dangerous
So
too.
you raised what I think has to be our last topic here, and because as much as you've described the horror of what's happening in the United States, and I think you've got it documented, it's horrible. And it's hard to imagine that any American would want to be a part of that.
Mhm.
But that being said, this really isn't just an American problem.
Right.
This is a global issue.
It is
And
indeed.
if you probably went around looking at other countries, you'd see some pretty nasty stuff going on. So
And I
here's
have.
my question.
Yeah.
Why hasn't the world done what? This should be a global initiative that we contribute to,
Yeah.
that where there's a problem, we deal with it as a globe, not as one little nation
Yeah.
or one big nation.
Yeah, I love that question. Well, I think there's two answers, simply, and then there's probably a lot more we could talk about. But the two simple answers are, one, we have put our trust into those global institutions that were created post-World War II, who are supposed to be the standard bearers. And I speak of the United Nations. But the United Nations was also created to defend nations. So it's a conflict of interest. And they're not really serving to confront the situation that we are seeing globally. And that is only going to get worse because of climate change and forever wars and all the rest of it. The second answer is racism. I've tried to figure out the base common denominator for all of this, and it always comes down to that.
What's choking you up right now?
What's choking me up right now? Because I live abroad, I have this 30,000-foot view as to what's happening here. I can see all 50 states much more clearly than when I'm here and I'm on the ground and my day is kind of taken up in more circumscribed events. And what I'm seeing, I cannot sleep at night.
No, I appreciate that. I know we're getting ready to end, Joyce, but I appreciate you putting the racial elephant in the room because we oftentimes run from that. And I feel a sense of liberation and I feel a sense of personal validation because I always talk about hope. I have Dr. Martin Luther King's quote that we must accept finite disappointment but never lose infinite hope. And people think that it's touchy-feely. They think that hope is kumbaya. They think it's water lilies and they think that it's all of that. But I can't really express what hope looks like from a macro level.
Yeah.
But I know what hope looks like on a micro level.
Yeah.
And we have to hold on to that hope. And so as you were presenting, I was here like really going through spiritual goosebumps because in the midst of everything that you were saying, you drew a social justice thread along the continuum of hope.
Yeah.
I also was scared for you
Yeah.
because, a lot of what you were talking about was very radical, very revolutionary. And I said,
That's why I said she didn't mince her words.
I said, she doesn't travel with security, because you're really talking about a lot of things at this pivotal moment where there's erasure, there's silence, but that hope really is something that for me, I hold on to in these dark times.
Yeah.
From a humanity-centered perspective, I just have always lived in this 53-year-old body wanting the best for everybody.
Yeah. Yeah.
And seeing the humanity of everyone. And I think that's really what PHRC after 70 years is about. You're disabled, come to us. You're LGBTQ plus, come to us. You're Jewish, you're Palestinian, you're a Muslim, and that's what I was saying back at the room. I mean, back at the university, is that a beloved community doesn't say that we have to all get along.
Right.
But when Ben Franklin talks about high levels of civility, and that beloved community just simply says that we still have to have conversations and not talk past one another.
Right.
What you really displayed for me today gives me hope because I suffer from racial fatigue. I suffer from racial trauma. This job for me is not a job, it's an assignment by God.
Yes.
And there have been times I said, man, if I get an opportunity to become a basketball coach at a high school,
you'll take it.
Or a crossing guard, I'm out.
Yeah.
But I can't. I can't. And so,
well, we all have our callings. And clearly, Sarah, your calling.
I was called to write this book.
to write
I remember
this.
the minute when I was called to write it. It was not.
Where were you?
I was at the border.
Wow.
I was looking over the Matamoros refugee camp,
Right.
and somebody said, "What do you do?" And I said, "I'm a teacher and an educator." And she said, "Capture their tales and take them north with you. We can't get heard beyond the 100-mile checkpoint." And in that moment, the muse entered me and said, "You're going to write this book." But here's what I think. I think we have an opportunity in all this horror, in all this terror. We have an incredible opportunity right now. I absolutely agree with you, because there has been so much work on the part of organizations such as yours to unmask racism and to enable folks across the color lines, including myself, to do the work of recognizing her own internal biases. And I think there are a lot more of us now than there were during the civil rights movement.
You can't unread some of the books that have been read.
Exactly. You know what? They might want to attack diversity, equality, and inclusion, but we're not going to let them, because we like the world in which we inhabit. With as I said, where we're buoyed by colors, creeds, and cultures across the board. We like that world. They're not going to take it away from us. We had 7 million people in the streets the other day. All we need is 11.5 million to get the 3.5% of the population that no authoritarian regime has ever been able to withstand. And we will bring this regime to its knees. And the sooner we do it, the better. And we're going to do it because we're going to stand arm in arm, no matter our culture, no matter our creed, no matter our color.
To the PHRC. I'll be in metaphoric arms, but I'm not.
All right. You have to be political free. Sorry, I don't.
But I think your point is
Not trying to become a greeter at Walmart.
I'm so sorry.
Well, this has been clearly an incredible conversation, and it could go on. I mean, you guys have
we could go
got
on.
a lot of issues here.
Well, we will go on at Grace.
Crossing the Line, Finding America in the Borderlands is Sarah Towle's book, and you know that she has done the work to speak as she has done. It is from an authority who's taken the time to research, to document, and to prove truth. And so we'll leave with this. We'll leave with this, that we are hopeful, despite everything going on.
Yeah,
we are
gotta
hopeful that if people know the truth, they will react to the truth. And the one thing that gives us hope is we know the arc of the universe bends
toward justice.
And this too
shall pass. If I could make one more comment, it is that the book is now out in a second edition. So if you want to go get it, make sure to ask for the second edition, because the first edition will come up and the bookseller will say, "Sorry, it's out of print." It's not. Just ask for the second edition and know that I wrote it for those who, if they only knew, would be outraged too.
So you must know. And that's why PennLive is here, to make sure you're informed. So with that, thank you all, and we'll see you next year at the 6th Peace and Justice in PA Awards.
Thank you, everybody.